And recording. Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest is a graduate with honors from the renowned University of Music and Performing Arts in Vienna. He has more than 2 decades of experience as a journalist for the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation. A personal encounter in the spring of 2000 awakened his interest in the strange topic of Breatharianism. He met a meditation teacher who allegedly had not eaten for more than a year. Still skeptical, he started a 10-year journey of research that took him around the globe. Searching for traces of evidence and skeptical scrutiny of this human mystery, 200 hours of footage were edited into a 90-minute feature documentary, In the Beginning, There Was Light. It premiered at the International Film Festival in Cannes and became one of the most influential and successful feature documentaries in Austrian cinema history. When it was shown in prime time on national television, viewership outnumbered Hollywood blockbusters like Harry Potter. He is a journalist, keynote speaker, and meditation trainer around the world. Currently, he has a #1 best-selling book in Austria called The Fountain of Youth Effect: How 16 Hours of Fasting Can Change Your Life. Welcome to the show, P.A. Straubinger.
Hi, Matt. Great to be in your show. Thank you.
I'm so excited you're here. I watched your documentary, and it's amazing, and it's exactly the questions that I had the second that I read the autobiography of a yogi, which you reference in the documentary, where apparently one of these yogis is living on no food and no water.
Yeah, it's a strange phenomenon that we find all over the world throughout all cultures. And it's not this crazy phenomenon out of the esoteric circles of the 90s, but we actually find it in the Christian tradition. We find it with yogis in India. We find it with Qigong masters in China, in Tibet, everywhere. And the normal reaction is, okay, this is just some religious story. And for example, the Swiss national saint, it is said that he did not eat for the last 20 years of his life, that he did not eat and drink for the last 20 years of his life. And in the 90s, I saw a documentary about him, and I thought, okay, this is a religious story, and you have to perceive this symbolically or something like that. But as you said, I met in the year spring 2000, I met a meditation teacher, and I took meditation classes with him, and after a while I heard from other students, do you know that he does not eat? And so I asked him, and I never really took this seriously. And he said, yeah, that's true. I made this strange process, and now for more than a year I did not eat. And I have, before we talk about this topic, I have to say, please don't do it. Just because you hear about this, please don't stop eating and drinking. Probably you will die if you just do this. So when we talk about this phenomenon, it's important to understand that this is nothing a goal you have to achieve or something like this. All the people who do this permanently told me they would start immediately if they would feel hunger or thirst. So this seems to be a kind of epiphenomenon, or not epi, but a kind of side effect of a certain state. And scientifically, we do not know to which extent this goes. So the longest study we have is on an Indian called Hiratan Manik for 411 days, just drinking water, no calories, and he lost 19 kilos during these 411 days. So that's a lot longer than medicine normally thinks we can live without food. But as he lost 19 kilos, this shows that, there is a little loss of energy during this time. we have to understand when we talk about this phenomenon that this guy was locked in a room, and perhaps we can talk a little later that also these people are nourished from the surrounding, but not via the way of food, but by the light of life, prana, chi, the life energy. And the life energy is more present in nature, for example. So I will talk about this a little later, that the life energy is a very... the life energy is the biggest mystery on this planet Earth. And here my wife is just coming completely naked. I don't know if
Make sure the camera is down.
Life energy.
It's a pleasant distraction for the show. Life continues.
Yeah, life continues. Life happens.
Well, what I wanted to jump in there and make a comment because, you know, you've already touched on so many fascinating things, and it's interesting because in your documentary, you have scientific studies of people claiming that they're breatharians, that they don't need food or water. Then they're held in scientific circumstances. But one of the points you made in the documentary where they did lose the kilos, I think that's such an important view because they're saying, look, like, I'm not eating food, but I'm being nourished. I'm being nourished by the sun. I'm being nourished by the environment. And there's work of Dan Winter. If you look him up, he has some really fascinating videos. He's a physicist. I barely understand what he's saying, but I've watched all of his stuff. But one of the things he'll constantly say is he'll talk about dead buildings. He's just like, you're working in a dead building with fluorescent light, like burning your energetic system. And so when that person is sitting in a room, in a concrete room. And then there's also a correlation between being on the ground level versus 30th floor. The higher you go up, there's a correlation in the amount of disease you have. So there's definitely real information in science that we know that being in the environment helps you physically, emotionally, in the spiritual body. So if you're in a hospital bed, you're not going to be nourished the same way as if you're outside.
That's the point. And now you already told so much what people don't understand normally when we talk about this topic. That in 2013, it was funny, scientist from the University of Washington called me and said he heard about my documentary and this is really interesting, if he could watch it in the English version, and I sent him a copy. And then he said, wow, this is really interesting. I have an explanation for you how this works. And the guy was Professor Gerald Pollack from the University of Washington, a biophysicist, and he's doing research on water. And he found a force phase of water beside liquid, solid, and vapor. And this force phase of water is our body water. It's called EC water. It's highly structured water. It's the water in our cells. And this water has negative charge, negative electric charge. And at the University of Washington, they were even able to build a water battery just made out of water, of this force phase of water and normal liquid water. And they produced electricity out of that. And he said that this force phase of water is charged by light. It can be also infrared light. And this was a very interesting missing link that I found because when you remember in the film, I interviewed this Chinese monks in the Wudang Mountains. Because in the Wudang Mountains, they have the oldest scriptures about this breatharian lifestyle. There they call it Bigu. Bigu Fuji means without bread, but only through chi. And this grandmaster said, you should not live on Bigu in the cities, because in the cities, the chi fields are not ordered, and you only should practice Bigu where the chi fields are ordered and where you have a lot of negatively charged ions. And I didn't understand this, because there was a Kung Fu monk in the middle of China talking to me about negatively charged ion. It didn't make sense for me. But finally, with this research from Professor Pollack, which came 3 years after I released the film, I suddenly had this missing link. He said the negatively charged ions we find in the woods, near waterfalls, in nature. And what you said on the ground, grounding is very important. It's not only the light of the sun, it's also grounding. You can be in a cave, be nourished by this light of life and these negatively charged ions. So it's very important to understand that the surrounding is very important. How these people are charged by the environment. And it's an explanation why these people so often underperform in scientific studies, because they are locked in hospitals, in concrete walls. They get air from the air conditioner with positively charged ions. It's dark, or they have no direct sunlight normally. And especially they are surrounded by concrete walls which produce positively charged ions. And so it's like trying to find evidence for being able to sail in an indoor swimming pool. It just won't work. So it would be necessary to do these studies in completely different surroundings and with different protocols. But science has this idea that we work like machines. This idea that the human body is just a combustion engine comes from the 18th century. Antoine Lavoisier, the father of modern chemistry, put forth his theory in 1777. And there he said the combustion processes in machines are more or less the same as the metabolism in organisms. So you have you need oxygen, you need fuel, and you produce energy and waste products. And he said it's more or less the same in machines and in living beings. And this fitted in very well with these upcoming ideas of the Age of Enlightenment, meaning that the nature, all organisms work chemically. On my website, lightdocumentary.com, I have a picture of this. I don't know if you saw this. I have there an article called The Tale of Man as a Machine. And there we see this picture of the digesting duck. And in the 18th and 17th century, they thought that they will be able to build animal machines. And up to now, we have to understand that science cannot produce one living cell, not talking about complex organisms. They cannot produce one single living cell. And we are built out of billions of these cells. And we have to understand that we work completely different from machines. And in the collective consciousness, in the collective consciousness, there is still the idea that we are machines. When we talk about our brains, we talk about computers, and when we talk about our bodies, we talk about machines, but we are no machines. We are organisms, and we work completely different. And the funny thing is that the the idea of the calorie, so that we are just living by calories, is still in our brains. But there is evidence now, 40 years old, that shows that the calorie mathematics are completely unscientific. In 1973, there was published an article in Nature, so the most renowned scientific journal in the world. It was called "How Much Food Does Man Require?" And the bottom line was, we don't know, because it's completely different from one person to another and from one situation to another. And in the 19th century, they tried to find evidence for this idea that we work like combustion engines. And they had very bad machines, this calorimeters, and they did not work very well. But in the 1950s and 60s, when they went to space, they had to calculate very exactly how much oxygen needs somebody, how much carbon dioxide, how much calories they need in space. And Dr. Paul Webb built for NASA highly sophisticated calorimeters. And he started to measure the human energy balance very exactly. And he found out that he says in one of his papers, the better the measurement, the higher is the evidence for energy amounts that you cannot explain calorically. And in 1980, he published a paper where he compared direct and indirect calorimetry. So he measured how much oxygen is going in and how much carbon dioxide is going out. And he compared this with the energy actually produced. And he found out that up to 23% of the energy in humans, completely normal humans, we are not talking about breatharians here, is calorically non-explainable. So up to 23% of the energy in human bodies is coming out of nowhere, or at least science cannot explain it. Of course, the Chinese medicine can explain it, or the Indian medicine can explain it. They tell us that the life force, chi or prana, is of course also coming through food and oxygen, but also directly via the skin. And this amount of direct chi or direct prana differs from person to person, from situation to situation. And we also have a chance to influence it. And another study showed that this amount of Dr. Paul Webb called it unmeasured energy. So this energy that cannot be explained by calorie mathematics, this unmeasured energy is bigger if you eat less. And this is what happens when you do fasting. Everybody who is doing fasting knows that in the first few days you lose a lot of weight, and then the curve is going more flat and you lose less weight. So our body obviously starts to get energy from different sources. And now it's getting very interesting, because it shows that we do not work like a car that needs always the same time amount of fuel, but we have different possibilities. And we also see that this idea of calorie mathematics is completely unscientific. It's like if I try to weigh my weight, and it says, you know, a guy like you has to have 72 kilos, but I can have 30 kilos more or 30 kilos less. So it's completely, calorie mathematics are not scientific, and we have to, we can be more relaxed when it comes to eating. And in the last few years, because I remember when I did my interviews in the between 2005 and 2010, most doctors said to me, fasting is complete nonsense. And in 2016, there came this Nobel Prize, the Medicine Nobel Prize for autophagy. Autophagy is this process, this fasting process that appears when the cell does not get food. And in former days, they thought this is dangerous, but they found out that this process, this fasting phenomenon of autophagy, is the best medicine for the body. It prevents cancer, it helps to prevent Alzheimer's disease and many other diseases, and also the cell does not age that fast. So that is also the reason why our book is called The Fountain of Youth Effect, because by fasting, you age less and you get healthier. So when we talk about this phenomenon of Breatharianism, we have to understand that this is not a discussion about black and white. This is not about eating 2,000 calories a day or nothing. We have a big range between these two extremes. And we also have to understand that in the Western world, we eat too much. Of course, there are still people starving, but the World Health Organization said that 2.2 billion of people suffer from the effects of overeating. In the West, we eat too much, and we eat too much of the wrong stuff. And I always say we have to understand that food has two different, is able to nourish us in two different ways. The first way is it nourishes us physically, which is important, of course, but in the Western world, it's even more important that it nourishes our emotional body. So if we eat sugar, for example, chocolate, all these fat, sweet stuff, it is not good for our physical body. It's a drug for our emotional body. But most people mix up these two things. If we have this idea of calorie mathematics in mind, where we think about, I need sugar to burn it, to get energy. No, it does not give you energy. It only produces fat. And it's a lot better if you take these calories in form of fresh food and vegetables and fresh, healthy food. And there is a book by a Russian doctor that is called We Eat Ourselves to Death. And she says that about 300 to 400 calories a day of fresh food would be enough. I don't know if this is true, but I know, as I do now intermittent fasting for 10 years, I can tell this is really very easy, and it makes you healthier and happier. So this is something all of us can do if we want. And these people who allegedly do not eat for years or decades, they are just an inspiration. We do not need to achieve this, or this does not need to be a goal. But it also shows us that this materialistic idea, this materialistic worldview is just an idea. It's not the truth. And that's also one of the messages I want to tell with my film, is that I want to question this materialistic worldview, this mechanistic, materialistic worldview that says our mind and our soul is nothing but an epiphenomenon of our brain activity.
Peter, wow, you said so much there, man. I wanted to dive in like
I told you, I talk and talk and talk.
No, it's good. No, it's great because there's so many relevant points that when you continued, there's so many things to touch on. But, the first one about like life force energy, chi, and the energy that we're consuming that we're not measuring. And so it's interesting that the Eastern, they account for that, and they believe like, no, there's something here and there's a force we're accounting for. And when I studied with indigenous elders, they had, David Lomber had this one where it's B, and his words are all what are the anagrams, like whether it's B Earth's energy, and that's what it stands for, is like be in peace. It means be Earth's energy. And when you said that, I was like, I wonder how many other ways we're being nourished. Sun, trees, however our body's functioning, the energetic field, we're an electromagnetic field, so we're obviously picking up signals from different things. So
also the inner light, we are nourished from the outside and from the inside. Because in my film, when you remember, I met Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Petaluma, and he's a consciousness researcher. And I asked him, is there an explanation from the view of consciousness research? And he said that what is consciousness? Consciousness is an ordering principle. And if this ordering principle leaves the body, we very quickly fall apart in completely uninteresting materialistic substances, the dust we read about in the Bible. So the interesting stuff is the consciousness. And this consciousness, this information is coming from the outside. Why there's one explanation, when you remember Fritz Albert Popp, he did the biophoton research. What are biophotons? Biophotons is a very weak light emission we find in all living cells. And when the cell dies, it's the light of life, actually. When the cell dies, this light disappears. It's a very, very weak radiation. Light, and you only see it if you enhance it technically. But it's not the quantity of light, it's the information that is encoded in there. And Fritz Albert Popp says that the sun emits this coherent information that is stored in the plants and indirectly in animals. When we eat that, we digest it, and he explains it, for example, with the chemical formula of sugar. You can divide the chemical formula of sugar in H2O, water, and carbon dioxide, CO2. Both leave the body. What stays is the light. The light is the important substance that nourishes us, the information that is in the food. And of course, there are biochemical processes, but the most important is the information. And Fritz Albert Popp says that what I mentioned earlier, it's not, I have to translate it correctly, it's not billion cells, it's trillion cells in English. Our body is a conglomerate of trillions of cells. And every single cell is a single living being. And these trillions of beings decide to produce this human being. And Fritz Albert Popp said it's completely naive to think that these trillions of living beings are organized by enzymes and chemicals. It only works with light. And so this light and the information, the coherent energy that is stored in this light is what we are living by. That's the light of life. And we get it from the outside, but also from the inside. So coherence, we know from meditation, for example, that what we do in meditation is we create order. That's the reason why, and there are so many studies that meditation works on all levels, also on the physical level, because meditation creates order. There is this saying, when we pray, we talk to God, but when we meditate, God talks to us. And we can change now the word God to transcendence, or to how's the word, collective unconsciousness. So it doesn't matter, but there is a place. We do not rule by our brain, by our ego, but where we get this order. And when we meditate, we get connected to this place, and there we get this order. And in India, they call it the Kundalini energy that raises up. And nearly, or all of the people I interviewed who do this have some sort of meditation practice. They had an epiphany or something like that. So the state of mind, the consciousness, has a lot to do with this phenomenon of Breatharianism. But we also have to understand it's not only the inner light that nourishes up, it's also the outer light. So it's a mixture, and it's nothing only a few yogis live by, but everybody. So I always say it's important to understand we are all living on light. And by light, I mean the light of life, not the electromagnetic wave spectrum of classical physics, but the light of life, the life energy. And it's the biggest mystery. Science has no idea what it is, how it works. There was, I don't know if you know Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich tried to bring this idea of life energy into the scientific discussion of the 20th century. And what happened to him? First, the Nazis burned his book in Germany. He was Austrian. And then he went to the United States. This was, okay, everybody says, we understand that. The Nazis were crazy, and Wilhelm Reich was a Jew and criminals. But then he went to the United States, and the Food and Drug Administration burned his books. So his books were burned twice in the 20th century because this guy was talking about organ. There was a trial where Wilhelm Reich said that a judge is not allowed to take scientific discussion, to take decisions in scientific discussions. So he went to jail, and he died in jail. So what we see here is that there is a big blind spot in science. And an Ayurvedic doctor once said to me, also in reference to Wilhelm Reich, because Wilhelm Reich said that science is necrophilic. They always have to kill things before they can study them. So if we look at something at the electron microscope, I think it's electronic microscope, we first have to kill it to watch it. And an Ayurvedic doctor once says to me, the reason why classical medicine does not understand these ideas of organ, prana, chi, these life energy things, because their big achievement was to dissect corpses. So they understood how the mechanical parts in the body worked, but they looked at dead bodies. So it's no wonder. So their know-how evolved from corpses. So for this Ayurvedic doctor, that was the explanation why they don't understand about the life force and about this energetic processes in the body. While the Chinese medicine and the Indian medicine, they only work with this life energy flow in acupuncture, and Ayurvedic doctors work with prana and so on, and nadis. And I don't say that classical medicine is bad or anything like that. I think it's important they come together, and that we finally are able to see science as a very helpful tool, but not as a philosophy. You know, the materialistic philosophy took science as a hostage for their ideas, and I think it's very important to open up and understand that we hardly know anything, and we can allow a lot of things.
Yeah, man. Well, you said so many great things that I want to kind of touch on, because I think they're all important, and really it's fundamental belief systems around just materialism. Like, we're physical bodies in a physical manifestation, yet when you take a particle all the way down, all of a sudden particles disappear and reappear. And so we don't know what's going on with that. And I like how you're talking about how the light has information, and also water carries information. And we're kind of informational beings. You know, I don't know where I heard this or what I'm trying to say, but it's like, it's something along memory. If you didn't have memory, then you wouldn't be like kind of cognizant of your existence as you move forward. It would be, you know, you'd be aware of this moment, but memory and that information is a great part of like your consciousness. And it kind of expands over time with memory. So memory is very fascinating too. And it just changes. So we're getting all of these different informational inputs. And I think that what you're suggesting here is like, hey, you know, it's not that you have to not eat. The understanding here is checking the paradigm of your reality, because one of the other fundamental things that you mentioned is that the West and many other places overeat, and it puts them in lethargy, it puts them in illness, it puts them in sickness and decay and anger and all that. And I don't know what the reason for that is, and you know, why we do it culturally, you know, whether we go down like conspiracy rabbit holes or, you know, just overeating and things like that. But it's important to look at.
It's a drug. It's self-medication.
It's a drug, yeah.
And there is a great book by Bruce Alexander, The Globalization of Addiction. And it's very interesting, because our ideas about addiction also come from a very materialistic worldview. It's coming from B.F. Skinner. And his ideas are that we are materialistic beings, you know, and they had these Skinner boxes with rats in it, and they gave him normal water and water with heroin, and they found out that once these rats start to drink the heroin water, they didn't stop and they died, because they overdosed. And Bruce Alexander looked at these laboratories, and when you look in my workshops, I always show these pictures of the cages of the rats. And we have to understand the rats are social beings, and they are held as prisoners in dark cages. And the only thing you can do there is overdose yourself with heroin. So Bruce Alexander said, okay, perhaps this has something to do with the way these rats are held. So he built Rat Park. It's like a paradise for rats where they could have sex and play. And it was beautiful. It was a paradise for rats. And he gave him the same choice again, clear water and water with heroin. And see what? They didn't overdose anymore. When they tried it, they left it and drank the clear water. And so what's coming out from there is we take drugs if we have big problems. And we have this big addiction problem in our world because we are not held correctly, because we have to function. We have to function and we have to produce effects, and we are seen as machines and not as human beings, as living beings. And that's the problem in our world, and probably everybody knows this, and me as well, because I work at a media corporation, you know, and you have to produce effects, and you have to produce them quickly and results, and yeah, and you just don't feel like it, and I would prefer to do something else. So you take something, some coffee or some sugar or whatever to work. It's self-medication. So I think it's very important that to first, of course, understand that it's not healthy, but we also have to have a clean emotional body. And that's this idea of crowding out. I think you also interviewed Edith Ubuntu Chan. Yeah, she's
she's amazing. And also Dean Radin too.
Okay, yeah. So you have exactly the right people there. And it's wonderful that there is a network of people who are working in the right direction. And Edith exactly has this idea of crowding out. So if you are happy, if you are full of beautiful things, you don't need drugs and overeating and all that stuff anymore. It disappears.
Yeah, 100%. Well, you hit on a huge point there that I've been curious about, not curious, maybe like studied, because I was curious why we still had war. And we look at the way we live, and it's very unnatural. Like you take a child who's playing outside, then you put them in the box of school, you tell them what to think, then they get a new box of high school, then they get the new box of university, then they get the new cubicle. And then as they work up, they get a bigger cubicle. And so the way that we're living is so unnatural. And it's also, as you put the example of the rats, it's antisocial. We're being conditioned more and more to be separate from our environment, from our peers, and they create states. And then we're addicted to those things because, you know, on the little scale, you get the emotional eating is such a good point, because when you amplify that, that's when you get into the harder drugs, because then you need to numb, right? You're so disconnected. But when you look outside, as somebody who is just like consciously observing, just having a look at the way things are, systematically, it's not ideal. You can create coherence within yourself as an individual cell. It is possible, and that's a lot about what this show is about, is creating that self coherence. However, you look at what's happening, and it's just like the mainstream way is incoherent. You know, what you watch on TV is probably not great for you. What they're selling you is probably not great for you. And you look, and like, you know, the food and what you talked about, overeating, it's such an interesting thing, because what I think you're talking about is breaking the paradigms of what's possible, the way that you view the world, and how we're interacting with it. And when you talked about the intermittent fasted turning on different systems, how interesting is that? Like, how many latent systems, I'm curious, we may have. When I was down in Guatemala studying with the Mayan elder, having conversations with him at a fire ceremony they were doing in Tikal, and I was with a group, but I was mostly there to learn from him. And one of the things he shared is like, we believe you have 20 senses. And so as we're changing what we put in the body and doing different things, whether it's going out in nature, or maybe it's meditating, or maybe it's cold training, or maybe it's breath, or maybe it's a combination of all of them, or maybe it's just sitting down. But, you know, actually, he believes you have 20 senses. So maybe you turn one on, and I want to share the example. He said he did a gathering of the elders in 95, and he gathered elders from North and South America. And I guess there was I don't know how many were there. I think about 200. And it was a crazy, hectic story, but there's one really special speaker that they had, and they were all excited because this guy had just the best energy, right? And so he said he stayed at his house, and he was in Guatemala, and he had a shower. And the second he turned it off, he got out, and he just comes out. He's just like, "Where do you have a lake?" He's like, "What?" He's like, "Your water is dead. Where is a lake?" And so when you talk about memory and water, the man that he was talking about lived in nature with no electronics, with no nothing, completely on and of the land. And if you think about living 5 years, 10 years, or your whole life on the land, connected to the earth, to the trees, to the water, to the forest. You even feel like that doing for a weekend trip. How would that change your consciousness, that energetic connection, your way of being, how many senses you have? And that's the question for me, is like, with your work, like I want to ask you, like, do you think, the breatharianism from your research, and you have the study of Dr. Sadir on Mataga. I forget the names that threw me off. I'm butchering them, but there's Giri Bala from the Yogananda one. There's you have so many examples in here, and some of them were under scientific scrutiny. And so, did you think it was real? How do you think they did it? And how do you think it can benefit us? Because you've alluded to this a little bit, but I do think there's a lot of practical application to this. As you said, it's like not to go all the way in, but there is something to be learned here. This is very paramount for how we're thinking. It's a huge shift. If this is real and we can prove it, it changes everything. More prominent than the 4-minute mile or going to, the moon, which were all big leaps. This expands our consciousness and a horizon in a big way.
Absolutely. So I'm completely convinced that we have an authentic phenomenon. Of course, I do not know if Prahlad Jani really did not eat for 70 years and did not drink for 70 years. Only Prahlad Jani himself knows, but that's not the point. If he eats once in a while or drinks every 3 years, I don't care. It's not important, because what's important to understand is that this materialistic idea that we need food to survive, it's I think one of the reasons why my film created so much controversy and why breatharianism creates so much controversy is because it questions this materialistic idea on such a basic level. If you have esoteric ideas, they are somewhere and they're not really in the world. But if there are people who do not have to eat, this really questions this materialistic paradigm on a very basic level. And what I saw is that there are different ways we can be nourished. And it's not important. This is not a game or a sport. Like you mentioned, we have different senses, and in India they call it different siddhi. So the siddhi are probably Dean Radin also talked about it. These supernatural abilities that can appear on the yoga path, and they are all superpowers you ever read in any comic. They are in in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and breatharianism, so that hunger and thirst disappear and you just live by direct chi or direct prana, is one of the siddhi. But there are so many. And if we understand that matter is just vibrating energy, it suddenly is not that strange anymore that you can go through a wall, because actually it's nothing. It's just vibrating energy. And this is not just an esoteric idea, but this is what modern physics is telling us, that matter is frozen light. Once I got from the German and Austrian skeptics organization, I won the prize for the biggest nonsense of 2011, and I went there and gave a speech. I took the prize, and
you take the prize.
And in the end, I said, that with my film, I don't want to motivate anybody that to stop eating, but I want to question the materialistic worldview. And the materialistic worldview is the religion of these guys, of these so-called skeptics. They are materialists, they are positivists. They believe that only the things are real that they can prove with their science, which is completely crazy because science knows nothing, as we know. And in the end, I said, I'm not the only one who questions this materialistic belief system. Max Planck, the founder of modern physics, said, and this is now an original quote, as a guy who did research on matter his whole life, he can say so much about matter. Matter as such does not exist. There is an intelligent mind behind matter that is the matrix of matter. You can look up the original quote in Wikiquote. You find it. So Max Planck, the founder of modern physics, says matter as such does not exist. Behind matter, there is an intelligent consciousness mind that is the matrix of all matter. Because these subatomic particles are not these balls that we see in our physics book. And it was very interesting for me to find out, because when I did my final exams in 1998, in my physics book, there was the atomic model of Niels Bohr. That's the one where you have these little balls in the middle, the protons and the neutrons, and there are little balls around the electrons, and this is how an atom looks, I was told. And it was until my research for In the Beginning There Was Light that I found out that this atomic model of Niels Bohr is outdated since 1926. Because afterwards they found out electrons are not these little balls, but matter is actually vibrating energy. It's frozen light. And if we have this in mind, suddenly all these superpowers are getting more and more conceivable, because it's energy and information. We are energy, information, our surrounding, and this solidness of matter is just an illusion of our senses. And that is finally then the bridge to this idea of the yogis that this materialistic manifestation is the Maya, the big illusion. And if you withdraw your senses from this Maya, then you can look behind it.
Yeah, man, all of that is super fascinating.
One more, I just have to talk to my wife.
Yeah.
Nina, ich bin jetzt auf Facebook Live.
Yeah, you know, the materialistic.
Yeah, life again.
yeah, totally. Well, you know, family, man, they got to be there. But yeah, it's there. You're touching on so many points, and one of the things I want to kind of move into was like the idea of intermittent fasting, and you know, how can we use this information to improve the quality of our lives? When I've gone down the rabbit holes of meditation and peak performance and what the human is capable of, that's what I like seeing stories of. When I was training with the Shaolin monks, you know, I was curious, is it possible to break stone, to break iron like they were doing? And they were doing it, but their training was superhuman. It was simple. They were poking trees all day to dent holes in trees and using chi and directing energy, because there are tricks, there are fakes out there, you know, magicians and things like that. And one of the things I've realized in my research is what black magic is when somebody does a magic trick convincing you it's real. So it's like saying I'm a breatharianism, but I sneak somehow a different way, you know what I mean? Get the food in somehow. And there are cases of that where I think that the person was not honest, but there's also cases where I think, you know what, that's honest. Like with the Shaolin monks, I looked up close. I try to see if there's any tricks. I watch what they're doing, and you look at their training, and then it makes sense how this extraordinary thing becomes possible, but their way of life is absolutely so different than ours. And the takeaway that I received was just
of life.
the takeaway that I got was to give myself a worthy goal and work that hard towards it, like they did for that one simple idea. So, you know, when you do intermittent fasting, what is happening is that a lot of people, and even fasting, they talk about a clarity of mind. And I've fasted and I've had that same thing. This clarity of mind is just become lighter. Maybe it turns on different systems. And Ramadan just happened, and my barber he does my beard, and it's amazing. I don't like going anywhere else. But you know, he was doing it, and I said, he was about 20 days in. I said, how do you feel? They don't eat. I think it was like 16 hours the day they don't eat. He wakes up at 4 a.m., gets breakfast, and can eat at 10 p.m. or something like that. And he said, honestly, man, I feel great. I have more energy. Normally I need a coffee. I need this and that. He's like, I am feeling amazing. And so now there's this whole world of intermittent fasting. And I know you know a lot about this. So in this world where it seems like, okay, if you entertain the idea, it's possible to live on light, what have you learned that we can adopt for practices to improve our mindset, our performance, our experience on this planet?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I always say, just trust your own experiences. And on all levels, not only with fasting, but with telepathy and whatever, because during my research I also came, and I mean, Dean Radin probably told you about that too, because there is also a lot of interesting evidence. But I also was have been to China, for example, where the Chinese military did a lot of research with supernatural powers. And also the US military did. I spoke with Hal Puthoff, for example, who was the director of the project Stargate, where they trained psychic spies. And he said, everybody who really did research on remote viewing know that it does exist. And Rupert Sheldrake also did a lot of research about this idea, for example, of telepathy. You know, when somebody says, you know, I knew that you called me, then the normal explanation is, okay, you think about this hundreds of times, and when it happens, then you remember it. It's just selective perception. But under scientific conditions, they found out there is a clear statistical effect. And in the project Stargate from the US military, they found clear evidence that there is a real supernatural effect. So science often tries to explain away these things. And I always say, trust your own experiences. Don't care about what somebody says is possible or not. It's more important that it works. For example, homeopathy. In Austria, they just threw out the only professor for homeopathy at the University of Vienna, because they say it's pseudoscientific. But I say, if people are healed, then where is the problem? They only don't, perhaps it's the placebo effect. But what is the placebo effect? It's the evidence for faith healing, for healing with our minds. But perhaps it's not only the placebo effect, but even more, and we just don't understand the mechanism behind it. So there is a lot of arrogance in many scientists. And
oh yeah, I just wanted to say something, because that reminded me, is that you know, you look at the placebo effect, but you talked about science, and science can only measure what we have now with the tools that they have, and that's it. So it's adapting. You know, we're changing the models of the world. But what you're speaking of, the challenge is that these great institutions have an idea that they're holding, and if there's information outside that messes up that paradigm, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of history, so they don't adapt quickly. It's not something that they're easily going to let go of, and they're more likely going to hold on and drive that right into the ground until, you know, there's nothing else, rather than moving forward and taking new understanding, new ideas. And the placebo effect is an incredible thing. It's incredible research. And so what you're speaking about is merging the two worlds. And I think that's important. We want Western science, but we also want to open our eyes to new possibilities, new paradigms, and how do we merge those together to have the greatest possible result? Because again, I think that what you're alluding to is we don't know really, like we know a bit of a bit. Once we kind of learn one tiny thing, that fractals to like 100, and that's kind of what I've learned through different experiences and through meditative experiences where I had very profound experiences where it goes beyond just local mind. Sometimes I say non-local mind. And all it did was give me a billion more questions, like one kind of an answer, but it's just like, you are in the mystery. There's no way you're figuring this is not possible. So when you learn this is good, but it's going to be infinite. So I think that that's the play we need. And it would be great if the institutions adopted that, but that's not the way that they're going with it.
Yeah, absolutely. There is this book, The Halftime of Facts, and it says that every 45 years, half of the so-called facts of science are in 45 years just a crazy idea. But it's that strange that all the time people think what science says now is the truth. And it really changes very quickly, because I remember 10 years ago, all the doctors said to me, fasting is nonsense. Now the Nobel Prize came out for autophagy in 2016, and suddenly fasting is the greatest thing we have. So it is quickly changing, and the scientists are like the modern priests. Brian Josephson said to me, he's a physics Nobel Prize winner, and he said that mainstream science works like the church a few hundred years ago. You have these clerics that decide what is the truth, and they decide what's written in the holy books, the peer-reviewed journals, and anybody who dares to speak out against this truth is excommunicated out of the church of science. And this really happens. And materialism is like a modern belief system, and it's important to question this belief system and just trust in life, because as we already said, we know nothing. Since the end of the 90s, they found out that science only was dealing with 4% of matter and energy in the universe. And these 4% also are explained with two theories, quantum theory and relativity theory, that do not fit together. So they do not have a unified formula for these 4%. And the 96% that are dark energy and dark matter, we hardly know anything about it. There is this saying about dark matter, we know nothing, and about dark energy we know less than nothing, and it's everywhere. It's in us and around us. And there's still this question of what is life energy. So if anybody says Breatharianism cannot exist because it does not fit in our scientific theories, I say that does not mean anything. It has no relevance.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's so fascinating. Like, you could take a simple example, like the 4-minute mile is impossible, or even let's say 10 years before the plane, 20 years before the plane. You look at cell phones, and I remember reading an article a long time ago. I'm talking about the exponential effect of technology and how it's leaping. These are greater and more profound effects in consciousness and science. And the thing is, we haven't grown up emotionally as a society, or like intellectually. We don't even have as a culture the values that you would instill on your children. We still have war, famine, greed, and all these different things. And so we get these next level toys like bigger guns and nuclear weapons. You push a button, now we're all dead through dispute at the playground. You know what I mean? This guy wore something that I don't like. They believe something that, I don't believe. And we have these massive issues. But one of the things you can comment on that, but one of the things I want to make sure that we touch on is intermittent fasting is blowing up. So I'm just curious if you can give us like the simple play-by-play on how do you intermittent fast and why the heck would you want to do it?
Yeah. Okay. So there are different ways of intermittent fasting, but the easiest one that I do every day is 16-8. So I can eat 8 hours and 16 hours just drinking. So water or tea, even you can even drink black coffee, but no sugar, no milk, just liquids without calories. That's the 16 hours. And you can choose if you want to dinner cancel or leave away the breakfast. I mean, it's important in the evening. I go to bed around 12 and I stop eating at 8. And so I can start eating again at 12 the next day. Normally, I prolong my fasting until 1 or 2. So it's better if you do 18 hours of fasting or 20 hours of fasting. And it's very easy. If your body gets used to it, there is no hunger anymore. And the funny thing is that you feel more energized. So why do you want to do it? Because it needs up to 10, 11 hours until the body starts to increase this condition of autophagy in the cell. What is this? Autophagy is Greek and means eating yourself. That sounds very bad, but actually it isn't, because the cell starts to eat or recycle the waste products in the cell. So we have to keep in mind every cell is a being or an own organism, and in all when life happens, there is also waste. And if you just put the waste on the street and there's nobody coming to clean this, then this is the ground for illnesses and for a lot of problems. And when we eat in the evening and then the next day eating breakfast, our cells never really are able to clean up all the waste products. And Alzheimer, for example, is one of the illnesses that is clearly connected with eating too much and not having these fasting phases. Cancer, but in this condition of autophagy, the cells even start to eat bad bacteria or viruses or anything like that. So meanwhile, there is a lot of evidence how good this is for our health. And that there's also a lot of evidence that we age less, so we stay younger. And it also shows that we are getting happier. We are happier. Our psychological condition is getting better, and there is the Nobel Prize 2017 was for the I think the English name is circadian code, for the inner watch, and how important this is. And it's also very funny because these two Nobel Prizes are now giving credit to this fact that we are not machines, because a machine works all the time, but organisms work in cycles. We need a time to sleep, we wake up, we have a time to eat, but we also need time to fast. And it's very important that we give our body time to rest and not eat all the time, because our cells need this time to clean up and to rest. And it is really very easy. So it's just an idea. I need energy. If I don't eat, I don't get enough energy. No, you get enough energy. You have a lot of energy if you eat in this 8 hours.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing all that. I've heard of very similar things. It's interesting because I've seen I haven't looked too much into intermittent fasting. Like I've had a bunch of discussions on it, but not really deep dive on the science and why you do it. I just know some of the protocols, and naturally, I've actually been moving towards that recently without even knowing it. I've just started skipping breakfast. I don't get hungry till the afternoon, and so I just leave it, and then it's been working out. So.
Absolutely. It was something I wanted to do all the time, but I heard you have to eat breakfast. Breakfast is the most important
Right.
meal
Yep.
of the day. And okay, so I ate something. And it was really a big relief to get this study, because our head and our mind often messes with us. And then we do not trust in our instincts and what our body is telling us, because somebody says you have to, because. So now I'm a lot more relaxed, and I just eat when I'm hungry. And you are able to set your inner clock as well. And of course, it's important to get a lot of daylight when it's sunny, and not too much artificial light when it's night. So there are a lot of helpful routines that we can use. And the funny thing is, when we start with a healthy routine, it's getting easier and easier to start other healthy routines. On the other way around, it's the same thing. Unhealthy routines attract more unhealthy routines.
Right. Yeah. And when you're sharing that, what it makes me kind of think about is like the body working overtime. Like if you eat so much food and you break it down to a cellular level, and you're always putting in this food, your body always has to do something. So you're feeling lethargic and less energy. And I've noticed when I fasted, I'll do a 1 day here and there, but sometimes I'll do 3, push to like 5. And the hardest thing for me when I do it is thinking about food. It's the addiction to eating. It's not even the hunger. There definitely is a hunger period where I'm like, I'm hungry. And then all of a sudden it's like not even hungry. I'm just bored. I'm just like, I could go make something. It tastes good. And again, like, I think that, my partner's just like, why would you not want to eat? She likes baked goods and things like that. And eating is pleasurable, and it's nice. And it's nice to have good meals and you sit down. It just seems like culturally we're overdoing it. Like when we went to France, and I was like, well, everybody's eating and smoking cigarettes, but they're fit. But you get the dessert, it's a little tiny dessert, They give me a coffee, it's a little tiny coffee. I come back to Canada and I'm like, give me the large. And I'm like guzzling this thing with, the hat with the 2 friggin' beer cozies on them or something. We just overdo it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. And do it consciously. Then it's even the bad stuff is producing something good. Because my experience is, when we are doing the bad stuff consciously, then suddenly it loses the attraction. I remember when I stopped smoking, I smoked a lot, and I did it very consciously. And this gave me the possibility to leave it, because I looked what it's giving me. Because of course it's giving me something, because I wouldn't do it if there isn't something positive. But you also have to look what you have to pay for. And if it's not good for you, then you see that you pay a lot more than you get. And so even if when we eat junk consciously, too much sugar or anything like that, it doesn't taste good anymore. It normally just tastes good when we do it unconsciously.
Yeah. And, one of the last questions I want to get in there before I let you go is, do you, I had a lot of people who do a 10-day, like a 5-day fast, a 10-day fast, a 21-day fast. And I had Dr. Henry Morse on the podcast, and he's a really excellent guy. And I asked him once, I was like, he's helped a lot of people with terminal illnesses, cancer, like really big ones, brain tumors. And I go, okay, I'm coming into you and I'm frigged up. I'm like maximum, terrible, debilitating disease, could be cancer, could be a massive brain tumor. What do you give me? And he goes, 40 days grapes. That was his answer. He goes, 40 days, just grapes. Now, I know people who've done 5-day fast, 10-day fast, 21-day fast, and they all talk about the mental clarity. I definitely experienced the mental clarity only doing 3 days. I think I made it to 4 or 5 days once. It was like I caved somewhere at a dinner. I think it was like 4. But I remember after 2-3 days, always like that's all I need for a reset. Do you find value in that? Do you recommend that? Do you know anything about those like longer ones?
Absolutely. I do 1 week fastings, but then I need, I at least I'm not able to do it in my everyday job. Mm-hmm. Because as I said, it needs a lot of peace of mind, and when I'm relaxed, I can do this. And as you said, it's not that I'm missing the physical energy. It's the problem that I start thinking about food all the time. And when I have to produce results at the same moment, and I'm just thinking about food, it just doesn't work out, I need time for myself, and when I'm relaxed in nature, then it works very good. But when I'm at work, it works very well with intermittent fasting, because then I know in 4 hours I will eat again, and that works out. But longer fasts just in holidays, and then it's very, very valuable, of course.
Yeah, I had the same experience. The only time I've been able to do longer ones is by myself, because there's just so much stimulus and stuff going on. I was like, this is so hard. Yeah, man, that's amazing. So is there anything that you wish that I had asked you or you want to talk about?
Oh, we talked about a lot of stuff, and I think it's good now because people have to digest this. So if anybody looked through this whole video, thank you for the attention. That's a lot of stuff, and I think it's very important because, as you said, we are these cells in society, and we create more health. The more cells are healthy, the more healthy is the whole system. And I really think this ideology of materialism, so that we are just these single beings, and we have to get a lot of stuff to thrive, that's not healthy for society. It creates war in the end. And one of the messages I bring in the end of my film is what Dean Radin says, and Amit Goswami, that on the consciousness level, we are connected. And when we experience this in meditation, for example, that we are connected, then suddenly it does not make sense anymore to make a war, because it's war against ourselves. So I really think that this materialistic paradigm produces a lot of disharmony in our world. It on a evolutionary level, it made sense, but now we are over it. So it helped us to create technology and all that stuff. But now we can move on, so we do not have to stay there. We can use this and add up the spiritual consciousness part now, and this will help our society a lot if we experience that we are connected on a very deep level, and that we can focus on our human strength. Because I think one of the good things about technology is that now robots and artificial intelligence could do all the unpleasant stuff, all the machine stuff. And we could really do the things we can do best, that things that need our soul, need our mind, our human touch. And yeah, this is my idea how it could work out. Of course, it could go also in the other direction, like Matrix and Terminator and that stuff. But I hope we manage it in the other direction.
Yes, me too. I completely agree. And I like the idea of people just understanding that we're connected and moving towards, peace. I think that's the next big upgrade in humanity is peace. It's that
peace
simple.
Of mind in yourself, and then
yeah,
on the society level.
100%. Well, I appreciate you coming on and your work and sharing everything that you did. Where can people find the documentary if they want to dive deeper? And as a bonus question, what's the most important thing that you've learned from studying this thing that's supposed to be impossible? Is the same question that a different one when I was with the Shaolin monk. He could break stone with 2 fingers, bigger pieces over his head. And, I was like, what's the trick? He's just like, no trick. You know what I mean? And the biggest thing that I learned, it was the persistence and dedication to poking the tree and using the energy. And that's when I knew that no matter what I did in my life, that would be, no matter what I did in my life, if I applied a third of that dedication, I'm going to have it. So I was just curious, and it was superhuman. I told him in the interview, I was like, most people would think this is not real, that this is not possible. Most people don't believe breatharianism is possible. And it's not about not eating. The idea is about what a human is capable of, how we rethink about our world. So yeah, leave it to you.
The most important thing that I learned during this whole process was actually that I came out of this little box I lived in. So I lived in this little cardboard box, and I found a way out. And it's so big, and this was wonderful. To find out that there's so much more than I imagined. And sometimes I got glimpses of that, but I cannot bring it back to everyday life. But just experiencing this is enough to transform my life. And I hope that I'm able to inspire people, and my film is just an inspiration to other people to believe in their own superhuman abilities. And I always say it's not important to see that somebody else is able to do wonders. We are wonders. We are wonders wrapped up in chemicals. And that's the important things. Every human being is a wonder. Every animal is a wonder. So if we could see this day by day, life would be so beautiful. Of course, that's hard, but to remember this all the time makes life so much easier, because 99.999% is perfect and everything, and there's just this little tiny thing that we create with our ego brain that creates disorder. So yeah, what I learned probably was the peace of mind that I got through meditation and some glimpses of understanding how big this all is.
Amazing. And so where can people watch the documentary or get a hold of you if they want to learn more?
lightdocumentary.com. There you can read a lot of articles about the backstory, and also watch the film on Vimeo on demand, and or order the DVD. It's all on lightdocumentary.com.
Awesome. Well, PA, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you. I appreciate your work, hitting the fringes and doing a complete documentary that I was very curious about. So you took away 3 years or 4 years of my life. I don't have to research my own because you did it for me. So thanks for diving down that mystery and doing what you're doing. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Matt. It was wonderful, and thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Bye-bye.
Peace.